Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei hui. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our fisheries debate. I'm going to hand the formal honour over to Tā Tipene O'Regan to open something very dear to Tipene's heart, being fisheries. But before doing so, I'd just like to have the honour of congratulating you, Tipene, on one of your many awards over the years. Tipene has been awarded the highest honour you can have here in New Zealand, being a member of the Order of New Zealand. A rare membership in that there's only 25 people. So on behalf of the members or the people gathered here in this room, and I'm sure on behalf of Ngāi Tahu, congratulations from us all and a significant acknowledgement of your mahi over the years, but also on behalf of our iwi, Ngāi Tahu. Tipene, given that this is a hui about fisheries, I was conscious many years ago of a little article that showed up in the press when you were the chairman of Sea Lords, and it talked about cutting little pretty cute seal pups. And I'm wondering, as part of the commemoration, the acknowledgement of your award, we can have a discussion at this panel about a customary fishing licence for seals and seal pups. Maybe you can refer to that particular event in your kōrero today.
Only when off air.
Only when off air. Well, at that particular time, your idea, which I thought was a fantastic one, made headline news here in New Zealand. Hoi anō. E Tipene, tēnei te mihi kia koe, mō tō honare kia koe, kia tātou hoki. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi kia koe.
Tēnā koe e te Rakihia. Hei mihi atu, mihi mai. Mihi mai. I'm going to open or finish my opening with a very short karakia, which you will recognise. But the reason I'm going to use that very short form is that it's the oldest single chant of Polynesian people going back to our origins as an distinct ethnic group in Polynesia. And we use it today very commonly for grace before meals, pausing at traffic lights or just about any ordinary function. And it's just important, I think, to remember that it's maritime or nautical origins from the launching of a waka. And you'll recognise it when I use it, but bear in mind it's one of those very ancient things which we share with the rest of Polynesia. And even though we use it very commonly, it is important to remember where it comes from, because ultimately it's where we come from. And I might add, where we belong. A piki mai, kake mai, hau mai tau waiore ki a hau. E tū te hana te moe, te queer, te pō nui, te pō roa, te pō keri keri. Ka tai mai koutou, ka tai mai tata, ka awatea. No mai, hara mai. Hara mai ki tēnei hui nunui, mō ka mahi, ka mahi e ka mahi, o te kai mahi, o te kaika, e tāoka mō tātou katoa. ke pāneke, e ke takaroa. Ka hara mai te tōki, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. This session today is something of a teaser for a much larger exercise on the significance and background in fisheries. There was a day once on the Marae o Tāko where that stalwart, rather better managed than Auntie Kera was our taua, Aunt Magda Walscott. She was a karetai. Then she had taught as a school teacher most of the kaumātua around her over the years. And she was one of our great po of our people during that period when I was, as the policeman put it, coming to notice. And she said, "Tipene, Tipene, why do we always have to be talking about fish? I'm sick and tired of talking about fish." And I was a bit taken aback, and I had to say, "Well, Auntie, fish has capitalised Ngāi Tahu properties. Fish has paid for this hui. Fish is about the only significant source of income as a people that we have." And you could probably work out the timing of this, David, but, and she said, "Well, why didn't someone tell me?" And going back in the car, driving her home, she reached over, touched her, she said, "I'm sorry I sounded a bit crabby today." I said, "It's all right, Tahu, kai te pai." And she said, "I never understood that's where the money came from." Well, he Kerēme. Auntie Magda's question could well be asked of Kai Tahu today, because the only consistent basis of income we've had through the recent disasters and difficulties that have beset us has been the constancy of our income from Ngāi Tahu fisheries. And if we've turned the corner, we're in the black, but fisheries has been at the core of our economic, if not cultural success. And I ask you to be mindful of that. The subject is huge in our history, probably more so than in the history of any other iwi. But it's a convoluted one, and it comes over a period, a long period of shifting and changing circumstances. Just as the government under Jacinda has had to struggle with a continually shifting target where everyone's around, every sector's demanding certainty. Everyone wants certainty. There is no certainty available as the pandemic morphs from one bug to another, another, and another. And the arrangements change. There's protests, there's all sorts of things that we've never had before in our history. And the government has had to change its course as the target shifts. And we were faced with that with fisheries, because we started off at one level with a whole round of protests created largely by urbanising Māori coming into the cities, and so all the mana whenua tribes around the cities were having all their mahi kai raided continually by these outsiders. When I was coming to notice, Christchurch consisted of a number of peri-urban runaka, or runanga. Today we call them papatipu, but they were sitting around the outskirts of the city, and every second Sunday they'd have hui and spend their whole time bitching about these North Islanders that had moved in to their city and were taking over. And of course a few of them married in. That made some peace possibilities and the alternative. But our people were isolated in their own corners, and it was these people coming in, raiding the maikakai. That included sea fisheries. And there's a huge turning point in our experience was the Te Wehi decision. When Tom Te Wehi from Ngāti Porou got caught with two Pākehā mates up near Motino, grossly overcatch and breaking the fisheries regulations, and they got convicted. Well, the convictions for the two Pākehā stood, but Tom appealed. And for various machinations, which you can look at at another time, a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek, Ngāi Tahu backed him. And Justice Williamson in the Christchurch High Court brought down the Te Wehi decision. It threw us into a tailspin, because all of a sudden, every Maori commercial fisherman on the coast felt totally free to proceed. The Ngāi Tahu Māori Trust Board convened a meeting under Rakihia's father at Rapaki. And we had a whole chain of experience. The game was changing. We then went to a whole series of movements over the Te Wehi decision, and which ended up with us negotiating with the Crown on behalf of Ngāi Tahu. And we got into that. We were just coming to a conclusion. Everything was at peace. We were negotiating quietly and happily. Then we had our Pearl Harbor moment because the Crown, under the Roger Douglas reforms, or Rogernomics, brought in a change called the Fisheries Amendment Act 1986. It hit us like a bomb. We felt, just as the Americans did, negotiating with the Japanese ambassador while the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor. We were on a whole new trajectory, shifting gear. And this shifting gear went on and on. We had a fisheries settlement in 1989. That was an interim settlement. We can tell the story of that a little later. And that brought David and Craig firmly into the frame as collaborators. Not wickedly, but helpfully. All of this was going on. I was at the time a member of the Ngāi Tahu Trust Board and a Ngāi Tahu's rent-a-mouth on Lambton Quay in Wellington. And I was deeply conscious of that we were on to a whole new game. But we didn't know that was happening. We went into a fisheries settlement in 1989, which did remarkable things for us. And then we went into another one after a whole series of further circumstances, which we hadn't anticipated, when Sealord became available for sale. And we were on a whole new trajectory again. So this leads me to bring one key message to you, which we will explore in a full wānaka over a couple of days, coming up shortly, or later this year, which we'll very carefully prepare for you in which you can understand the changing circumstances and the overlapping timelines of the litigation and the battle which brought us to the final settlement. Because when we set out on it, Sealord was not for sale. Carter Holt was still the owner of Sealord, and the Sealord was not a solely deep water company. All that changed, and we had to shift and change with it. It's a convoluted and long-running story, but just as Jacinda's targets keep shifting, so did ours, and we had to respond to it. Sir Harold Macmillan, the great Prime Minister of Britain, right through the Suez Crisis and all of those things, which I know you may have heard of, but were big in my life as a youngster. He was approached one day at a Tory party conference, and they said, a young, earnest young Tory approached him and said, Sir Harold, what is the great determinant of political decision-making? The old man triggered his moustaches. Yes, boy. Yes, dear boy. Political decision-making. Dear boy, the primary driver of political decisions is circumstances, dear boy, circumstances. And that's what we'll be talking about when we do the big wānanga, for which this is merely a teaser. Te koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou.
Kia ora tātou katoa. For this fifth workshop in the Te Kerēme and Ngāi Tahu Settlement Workshop Series, we'll be focused on Ngāi Tahu and the Fisheries Settlement. Now, before hearing from some of our guests who were participants and players from the Ngāi Tahu side in the lead up to and in the negotiations and actual 1989 interim settlement and the 1992 final settlement and its aftermath, I'll try to provide an introduction to some of the key issues at play and the developments in the mid-1980s, which would eventually lead to these fisheries settlements. Now, as with treaty settlement negotiations generally, the entire process was very much influenced and tied into the neoliberal reforms that were being undertaken by the fourth Labour government. And although the reforms of the fishing industry was certainly something that preceded, or the plans that were being put in place preceded the fourth Labour government, it eventually did become tied up in some of the major judicial developments and eventually political developments, which would lead to the negotiation of settlements specifically related to commercial sea fisheries. And Ngāi Tahu ultimately had to negotiate the settlement of its own sea fisheries claims along with the rest of Māoridom. And it would certainly be something that will be discussed later by our guest speakers, I'm sure. We can see here Tā Tipene O'Regan signing with Doug Graham and others watching on. So let's try to contextualize a little bit the issues surrounding these modern fishing claims. And I'll hope to provide just a bit of an introduction to the quota management system, to what was behind the advancement of Māori claims regarding fisheries. Now you can see there in that section 88, subsection 2 of the Fisheries Act 1983, this clause that nothing in this act shall affect any Māori fishing rights. And just as we had explored in the previous workshop, the Waitangi Tribunal's Ngāi Tahu Sea Fisheries Report, and we talked about the long-standing nature of Ngāi Tahu sea fisheries claims based upon the ways in which the Crown had neglected to follow clauses such as this, which had existed in various fisheries legislation, of which there was over dozens of different pieces of legislation from the late 1800s into the early and mid 1980s. But of course, that was what was at the core of so many fishing claims from Māori generally, and certainly from Ngāi Tahu, that their own fishing rights, guaranteed under both versions of the treaty, under the Treaty of Waitangi and also Te Tiriti o Waitangi. But it was finally in the mid-1980s, with some of the revolutions that were occurring in terms of decisions from the court, and eventually major changes that would need to be made at a political level. And a lot of this came about due to the introduction of the Quota Management System, or QMS, through the Fisheries Amendment Act 1986. The Quota Management System was the first of its kind in the world. It's been adopted in many different jurisdictions now, but it very much fed into the way in which New Zealand has been viewed as a little bit of a social laboratory. And so this quota management system, the problem that it was trying to address was the drastic overfishing that was taking place in New Zealand waters. And so conservation was ultimately the goal. And here you would have the creation of a new property right. Because at the common law, fish only become property once they're caught. What the quota management system was trying to do was to create this new tradable property right, which would limit the amount of fish that could be caught across various different species in any given year. And the government would announce the quota which would exist for that year. And in this way, if there had been too much fishing taking place in the previous year and the populations hadn't recovered, that this would be a strong conservation measure. Now, there was at least two major sides to the treaty breaches which emerged out of the introduction of QMS. Certainly, the creation of this new property right was a strong basis for the Ngāi Tahu and general Māori claim as well. It is clear that Māori fishing rights are protected under both versions of the treaty. And as a result, if a new property right was being created out of this resource, then certainly there would have to be a provision for Māori, for Ngāi Tahu, certainly within their own rohe, it was perceived at the time. And so the creation of this new property right without any consideration for the treaty partner was certainly one main limb of the claim. Another major aspect was about the ways in which the QMS system was implemented. It was something which largely benefited large-scale commercial fishing companies, Pākehā companies that had been responsible. They are highly subsidized by the Crown prior to the Fourth Labour government, and they had been responsible for that overfishing. But the quota management system would create quota that would renew perpetually. You wouldn't have to purchase new quota every year. So when the first quota was provided in 1986, those large companies that knew in the lead up that they needed to fish as much as possible to receive the largest share which they could out of this new allocated quota. And in this kind of environment, Māori and Ngāi Tahu fishers, who are often part-time, who are often not fishing at the rates of these huge commercial Pākehā companies, they became severely disadvantaged through this initial allocation of quota. Now, there were also some important local developments in terms of fisheries in the courts. The case of Te Wehi versus Regional Fisheries Officer in 1986, which found in favor of Tom Te Wehi, who was not Ngāi Tahu, but he had received the permission of Rakihia Tau Sr., and he was taking fish at the Motunau River mouth. And he was pulled up by a fisheries officer. And Te Wehi took his case to court, claiming a customary right that had never been extinguished. And quite surprisingly, the court found in his favor. They in turn were quoting Canadian judges who had recently made decisions arguing that Aboriginal title could not be extinguished except for explicitly. It couldn't be extinguished by a so-called judicial sidewind, where other actions of the Crown ultimately lead, to that extinguishment. It had to be done very clearly. And so although this was unrelated to the QMS system, it was incredibly important in terms of the jurisprudence involving not only the treaty, because this was fundamentally based on something almost beyond the treaty on Aboriginal title. Now, gradually, the focus in the Waitangi Tribunal and in the courts did shift to addressing the QMS. And during the Muri Whenua fisheries inquiry in the far north in 1986, Iwi and Hapu, as well from that rohe, as well as others who were attending the hearings, called on the Waitangi Tribunal to make a statement to the Crown to halt the allocation of quota because of the many issues in terms of the treaty. And the result was this memorandum to the Director General of Fisheries. This was quickly followed in 1987 by another case of New Zealand Māori Council versus Attorney General. We learned about the so-called lands case in the previous workshop. This was similarly titled, but relation to fisheries. And here, Justice Grieg granted an injunction to the Māori Council halting the allocation. And there were other iwi also involved with their own litigation, such as the Ngāi Tahu Māori Trust Board. And all of this combined served to halt this allocation process, eventually leading to the 1989 interim settlement, the 1992 final settlement as well, and eventually the challenging 12 years that followed regarding the allocation. I really look forward to hearing from our speakers about their own experiences and their own thoughts about these processes. Hopefully this introduction regarding at least the basis for the claim in relation to the QMS system and the significant judicial developments that occurred will help, hopefully, in some of the understanding regarding this first major settlement in our modern treaty settlement process, but perhaps one of the most challenging. Ka kite, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Kia ora koutou te whānau, that was Martin Fisher. I suspect he's somewhere heading towards Hungary at the moment to rescue his parents, to get them back to Canada. This is the time where Tipene and myself and Craig are going to have a kōrero about some of these elements of what both Tipene and Martin have been speaking about this morning. First of all, what do I call you? Your Eminence, Your Majesty, or just you, Tipene?
Well, if you call me anything else, I now have sufficient authority to assure you you'll be in trouble.
Right. We had this stand-up outside this building this morning where I suggested that the only gong he's going to get now, or any time in the future, is as a papal knight. But to be a papal knight, you have to be a really good Catholic. And I can tell you, he is not a very good Catholic. He didn't produce 21 kids, so that's an example of just how bad a Catholic he has been. But Tipene, on behalf of our whānau from home, our congratulations and mihis to you.
Tēnā koe tohu.
As I said, this is a time when we get an opportunity to talk further about these settlements and how we got there. Now, I want to take you all back in time to when our people first arrived here in this huge land. Aotearoa, as the Māori Party call it, me te Waipounamu. And when our people first settled here in this land, whether they were Waitaha, Te Rapuwai or Māmoe or Tahu, our rangatira, our ariki, claimed particular parts of the landscape. They became the mana whenua, the true mana whenua of those areas. And those areas included fisheries resources, because those fisheries out there off the coast were so important to maintain the mana of a particular place, and this is where we get that expression mana whenua, mana moana. What is off your coast is yours. Now, our people arrived, they settled on the coast because that's where the resources were. They didn't have to travel too far inland to gather kai. Birds were plentiful, and of course the resources were on the coast itself and off the coastline itself. Now, I can explain to you briefly, and some of this material was used in our evidence before the Waitangi Tribunal, as to the importance of our cultural and traditional network of Rakihia, our fishing grounds, our resources that were plentiful at the time off this coastline of Te Waipounamu. And our chiefs and their families fought for those resources, and they died for them. And many of their bones rest on those fishing grounds. And one example is off the Kaikoura coast, probably further up towards Mangamanu, where Te Ika Whataroa was a place where 2 crews from fishing waka fought and died on that ground. And it's a hāpuka ground of huge importance to the people of Katikuri and Ngāi Tuahuriri, and it's at the present time being challenged by some of the hordes from the north. As we come further south off the North Otago coast, off the Waitaki River mouth, is Tuhaitara, a famous ancestress of our people from here. And as she took her footsteps following Marukore south down the coast, she left as her footprints hāpuka grounds, and Tuhaitara is a well-known family, for my family, a well-known hāpuka ground off Moeraki. Takia Maru, Taki Te Uru, other fishing grounds, again maintained the mana of that particular hapu and whānau that existed adjacent to those fishing grounds. Then we get away down to Ruapuke, and everyone knows where Ruapuke Island is. A lot of you descend from those of our tupuna that lived in that place. And south of Ruapuke is a wonderful hāpuka bed ground, and that one is called Taurakahika. Now that ground has a story all to all of its own, and Joseph will be amused by this one. The story of Rakihia is hapuka ground that we gave the blessing for the people of the Chatham Islands as they moved down to the Auckland Islands to sustain themselves with fresh fish. And they travelled through those grounds, and we allowed them to fish that ground as they moved south. And that's the Ngāti Mutunga people. And we get right around to the Pusaga banks off the southwest coast, the really tiger country for us as fishers. And there is Tahito Tarere. Tahito Tarere is the Pusaga bank, and that's about 26 miles, nautical miles off the southwest coast of Pusaga Point. And our koiwi lay there as protection for those fishing grounds down there off that coast. And we continue right around our rohe with particular fishing grounds that were important to those regional chiefs, those regional rakatira that existed and lived in those areas. And they protected those fishing grounds with their lives and the lives of their people. Okay, so shortly I'm going to introduce this discussion with Tipene, but I'm getting my say in first, just in case His Eminence has a bit too much to say. So we then track on through our lives as a people living in this area in a reasonably settled state, and there were disputes over the fishing grounds, there were disputes over the fishing resources off the coast, because the source of mana of those particular species that were caught in those areas, particularly seasonally, was always around the fat content in the heads of those large fish. And the importance of that fat content to, and only the chiefs ever ate the fat content, and ate the heads of the fish, they left the fillets to the families. But the fat content was important during winter particularly, because that was the preservative that was used to preserve those fish. As time went by, and as we can account for, the arrival of the European, the Pākehā, was an interesting phase in our history as a people, because the three of us, I'm not sure about Rakihia, but the three of us all descend from whalers. And that's only 2 or 3 generations ago that those whalers were prolific on the coast around the southern part of this island. And those whalers, sealers arrived here first. Their right of access or right of entry really was to take a Māori wife, and hence we are the result. Many of us have our relations down in Bluff. We're all very closely connected through those whaling entities and those Māori wives. And we're no further away than second cousins between the three of us. So that's really important to remember that we have a long and pretty arduous history and tradition of fishing those deep waters off our coastline. As time went on, of course, those particularly American whaling fleets and their crews moved north. And they moved right up to the east coast of the North Island and caught the bay whales up there as well. Now, I don't know if everyone knows what a bay whale is. We didn't go chasing the big sperm whales. We actually targeted southern right whales. And they were the whales that would come into the bays, like just off Otako, down in Bluff, in Te Waiwai Bay at Moiraki, in the bay there at Moiraki. Those animals would come right in close inshore, and it was easy to actually target them and harpoon them and bring them ashore to those whaling stations. So they were essentially American whalers. And I, for one, I'm a brag from Bluff, and I descend from a indigenous American whaler from the United States. So, yeah, Hiawatha's in my blood somewhere. So that's where we come from as a people. After the whalers had decimated the southern right whales around the coast, they had to do something. What the hell were they going to do? They had to take a Māori wife because that gave them that right of entry and it allowed them to stay on the land that they were living on at the time. And in many cases, they didn't stick around with those Māori wives. They moved on. And there are very good examples. Many of you live in Christchurch here. You know where Price's Valley is, just out the road here. Captain Price was a bit of a naughty boy. We're all connected to him. He had a Māori wife or two, or three, or four, and he left them resting somewhere else and took another wife. And that's the result is Price's Valley out here, out the road. Now, we've got to the stage where the whaling is completed. What do these whalers do with themselves? Many of them became farmers, and land was allocated by the New Zealand company to all sorts of people except us. And many of those early whalers and their families were allocated land blocks that were 5, 6, 7, 10 times bigger than our native reserves. So our people were struggling right from the get-go. The result was that our people became disenfranchised. We weren't able to move inland to gather our weka on our seasonal practices of mahi kakai. And that made it really difficult for our people to actually survive on the pa, on those reserves. And even today, you'll note that many of our families have moved away from the reserves, such as Otako, Moeraki, Awarua, and Tuahiwi. Many have stayed, but a lot have gone to town. They've moved to other places, including Australia. So the vibrancy of our families and our population are no longer there. So we're getting up to the stage now where many became fishermen. And it's interesting to note that many of our families are connected to the Shetland Islands because a number of Shetland Islanders came to New Zealand at that time after the whaling, and they were skilled fishers and they were skilled boat builders. And I've got photos at home at Moeraki of 40 or 50 boats tied up on moorings in Moeraki. It's unbelievable. I don't know what the hell they used them all for, but they were there. And those Shetland Islanders still exist today, and they married into our families, and they are very skilled fishers of fish. So that was the lead into a time when we started getting raising concerns about the slow destruction and decimation of our fishing resources. And over time, people like Uncle Rani, Craig's dad and my grandfather and others started to complain to various government departments about the fact that the fisheries resource was taking a bit of a hammering. It was pretty much everyone for themselves, and you could take as much fish as you liked. And sometimes we got over greedy, and the result has been that we ran into a few situations. So I'm going to ask Tipene and Craig, perhaps Craig might want to make a comment about what we've talked about so far, but that's the stage where we started to disrupt the status quo and start complaining about our customary rights. You got any comments, mate? Did I say everything right?
Well, you pretty much stole everything I was going to say.
Oh,
here,
that's
but,
all right.
the bits you didn't steal, Tipene had stolen.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating time to actually see an embodiment of people coming together for all the right reasons. There were commercial that Tipene touched on too, but just seeing the actual demise of our fisheries and how we could recover and how we could move from just being, as you've talked through, David, just a recipient of either government miserliness or a victim. And we expressed some of those views forcibly and didn't really get heard. And it was just through this process that we could actually almost give a gift back to Tangaroa. We adopted that sustainability investment, if you like, in the QMS, which we thought was an incredibly important mechanism. I think Tipene.
Yeah, the thing that gets me about this process is that I said before about circumstances changing, but you see, the great turning point was the Te Wehi decision. Tom Te Wehi came from Tokomaru Bay, and he goes out fishing. On the whole, he had the good sense to make friends with the locals, and he had a relation called Bill Napier, who's also from Tokomaru Bay, from Te Whanau Rua Taupare. And he, Bill, when Tom got caught by the fisheries officer with his two Pākehā mates, they got thumped in the courts, and Tom appealed. His Pākehā mates didn't appeal, but he appealed, and the judge found on his behalf, and that appeal to Justice Williamson in the Christchurch High Courts, led by Mike Knowles, was not to do with the treaty. It was to do with an element of common law, which is Aboriginal rights. And it had been imported into New Zealand, argued Mike, by the treaty, but it was the common law right of Indigenous people to subsistence. In other words, they could fish non-commercially, and as long as they weren't selling it, they were not bound by the fisheries regulations. And that's the provision that we referred to, Martin's referring to in the courts. Now, so the Williamson decision on Te Wehi was, that was supported by Ngāi Tahu. And what he said was, the judge said that a Māori person exercising fishing for subsistence is not bound by the fisheries regulations because there's an overriding principle of common law. As long as they're non-commercial, they're right, they're okay, and they're not bound by the fisheries regulations. And Tom Te Wehi was acquitted. Now, that was the thing that they said, well, he doesn't belong here, but he had the permission to do so from the mana whenua. And so it's a combination of elements, but the Te Wehi decision focused our attention as a tribe on the legal cases. And that's what led to Rakihia's father convening the meeting at Rapaki when all the runanga came together.
You've got to remember, Tipene, that this gap in what was occurring within the resource at the time went from somewhere in the mid-1800s right through to the Williamson decision, which was mid-1900s. So there was this huge gap of the depletion of our resources off the coast. And we know better than anyone, Craig and I, because we're involved in it, in the process of that depletion. So I guess the culmination, Tipene, was the fact that the Williamson decision was it was a moment in time where we all sat up and took notice of what was happening.
Indeed. And we realised that we had some room to move, but we also wanted to stop all of these out-of-towners who are moving, because don't forget, Māori urban migration is a process of goes north to south. We were the recipients of very large numbers of traders. It didn't stick to just to fish. Dear old poa Ricky Ellison out at Taumutu, he used to be absolutely beside himself with anxiety because he thought he was going to have all these North Island Māori dying on his patch. Why? Because there's a spring there, a puna, called Te Waiwhakaheke Tū Pāpaku. It's a spring that goes in like that and sucks, comes up at the sides and goes down. They used to use it for water burial. People were buried in Waiwhakaheke Tū Pāpaku. I think Hākoko Tātou 2 was the last one.
Yeah.
But that spring fed all sorts of other streams. And here's all these town Māori coming out, and because of wonderful watercress. And Ricky couldn't stand the thought of having these people dying on his patch by eating out of these tapu streams, because they'd be made tapu by their connection to Waiwhakaheke Tū Pāpaku. There's another spring of the same name at Otako.
Yeah.
But that, so this movement of people in was really quite a difficulty for us. And we had problems with kawa, the marae and things of that kind. And anyhow, what I wanted to spell out to you, that the law was altered by Te Wehi, but the Te Wehi decision activated us
Yes. Yeah.
in a way we hadn't been before.
I think Charmaine's waving furiously up the back there for some reason. We're going to have a break, are we, Rick? It's a good place to stop, though, Tipene. The fact is that...
And you've just effectively stopped me.
We're right. I'm bloody good at it, aren't I? I deserve applause here. Kia ora. What now, Rick?
Kia ora, tātou. We're going to... actually, we've got another couple of minutes. Craig, did you want to have a further conversation?
I'm happy to give that presentation if you like. About 10 minutes.
Okay, then.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Look, as part of the claim I presented to the Waitangi Tribunal at Otago on the Crown's failure to manage and protect the waterways throughout Otago, I actually used the reports of Crown agencies to confirm the state of the waterways by their own hand, if you like, that undoubtedly affected those waterways and were a critical source of mihinga kai and more to us. And from that process, I engaged with Ngāi Tahu leadership and was a keen observer and supporter of the claim. Following that, Tā Tipene approached me in terms of my experience with our family business at Otago Fisheries. We operated in Otago and Southland, primarily focused on inshore vessels, as well as being part of the deep water fishery through a shareholding in South Island Deep Water Fisheries. So we focus locally on Quota, on teo and wetfish. And they were species under our control. But we also had access to deep water fisheries such as squid, oreodories and orange ruffy. Now, I'd been part of the process prior to the introduction of the QMS and enjoyed engagement in the early days of the Māori position, or actually developing a position on fisheries. So while my day job was at Otago Fisheries, I drifted into assisting Tā Tipene, David and the team as we thought about how and where Māori fisheries rights could be secured. It was a really turbulent time and a fraught one. Tipene and David have glossed over it, but they were tough times. Industry reacted, for the most part, pretty poorly. They saw this Māori squabble as an attack on their newly acquired or allocated rights. And Section 88.2 became a swear word in industry circles. I remember standing up at a seafood conference in Nelson advocating for a reasoned response and genuine engagement with iwi. And I was held down by the meeting. In particular, I remember a couple of the leaders of the time who pretty quickly cashed up and departed in short order when it suited their corporate bosses. They argued for a fighting fund, for staff commitments to industry leadership against this threat, even though they'd only been in the game for 5 minutes. But I also remember people like Dave Sharp from Wilson Neal, David Anderson from Sanford, and later Vaughan Wilkinson from Siminowich, who supported my right to speak, even tried in their own way to think of possible solutions. They didn't always believe what I said or understand the scale of what we were fighting for, but they showed respect, which I think was a big step for them. Inevitably, it led to hui, wānanga, arguments internally within Māori, externally with industry and with the Crown, but we made progress. Memorable events were Tipene's presentation to ministers that, yes, he'd convinced them they could have half the fishery back, we'd only keep 50%. I actually think we frightened enough members of the forces against us to get a reactionary approach that looked to actually sidestep the rights argument we were winning, and they started to talk about what would satisfy you. Now, as soon as they came to a discussion around quantum, we knew we'd run the rights argument, and now it was a negotiation. So the next set of attacks came around Māori capability, competence, on the basis that our opponents perceived that they'd lost the rights argument, so it actually did cut down the quantum by saying, oh, you guys aren't ready for it. So it fell to us to demonstrate we were ready, willing and able. And to be fair, that wasn't necessarily the case across Aotearoa. Our sense of readiness in the north was that fishers were largely inshore, largely contracted or wharf sales, often part-time, and many in fact had been excluded from the QMS for that very reason, and in few cases affiliated or operating along iwi lines. And that was different for us. We had a large full-time fisher community across all parts of the industry, including skippers on some of the deepwater super trawlers, and we were involved through to the market. Not just harvesters, not just filleters, not that they're not important, but we were across the breadth of the sector. And I think it fell to us, Ngāi Tahu, by virtue of leading through Tipene and his supporters at the negotiating table and later at unofficial after-hours meetings, to refute the arguments of capability and expertise and capacity. And indeed, in a couple of cheeky moments, we did say we could take over the whole industry. We just needed a little bit more time to get our bits and pieces in place. That might have been throwing some burley out as bait. But our figures were precise, focused and believable. They stood up and the case against us fell down. So maybe some of that was work in the dark, but very important for all that. Work in the dark does bring back other memories of the process. It wasn't unusual for me to be in Wellington working either on the fisheries claim or with a different hat working as part of the industry, doing exciting stuff like rock lobster stock assessments, aggregation limits, sustainability assessments, thinking about industry structure. So I'd make my way back to the hotel for the evening, and often after midnight the phone would go, gruff voice would say, "You awake?" And I'd say, well, I am now, Tipene. And then I'd get my writing instructions, or a call to Bidwell Street, sometimes to the company of ministers, often officials, and our team, and we'd work through the night. So those sorts of things led to the settlement in a couple of tranches, and ultimately to greater swings of wins and losses, and what I call a fundamental betrayal by the politicians on where the fruits of that settlement should have gone. Time was our friend in that it was a great time to raise the issue of Section 88.2 and resolving Māori rights as a thing. Time was the enemy of Ngāi Tahu at the allocation method, and it was well used by Shane and others to cast a developmental agenda over the allocation debate. As David said, our allocation belief was it was based on proximity to coastline and use. It was always our argument, mana whenua, mana moana. But we lost those arguments to democracy. The tabulation of the numbers of those who would benefit made the decision by the politicians understandable, if not acceptable. They counted votes, not values. Paradoxically, adopting the mantra the industry had used and contesting the settlement around building capability, skills and capacity. And thus the allocation should have a bias as to where the need was, and that proxy was population. But our time is our friend again as we look to grow our footprint in the sector, as we say, grow our finprint, by either acquiring quota or shares in quota-rich companies. But I don't think Tā Tipene, David, or my vision has ever wavered in terms of growing our presence and our position in the sector, and nor should it. I also remember the faces of so many who have participated in the struggle. Many no longer with us, but their words endure. Even if sometimes I didn't agree with them at the time, it was a rich and robust set of arguments and engagements. We were lucky we had a great team supporting the negotiation in this issue, as with the main claim, tireless, driven and dedicated. I'm also incredibly proud of being able to wear a blue ruffie, the badge of those who prosecuted the fisheries claim. And why a blue ruffie? Industry never got it, because it was never about a fish that was there. It was all about a fish that might have been there. It was about possibility, about developing a future, not a dependency, and about confidence in our ability to be navigators in this sector. We owe an awful lot to those who wear this badge, and in particular, again, acknowledge Tipene's central role, supported by many, but often fighting alone. And like the blue ruffie, it sets the challenge for us all how our position is to be finalised and configured. It remains work in progress. Time was our friend and our enemy, but we had to be agile and move when the circumstances were with us and against us. We were adaptable. Again, we stole whatever technologies we didn't have and used it to their fullest ability. And we had expertise. And again, we'd adopt expertise if we saw someone doing it better. And we had determination. It's more necessary now than ever in terms of supporting our leaders and our structures. So is this a final settlement? My answer is most definitely it's not. What it was is a stage in our post of our quest to seek rangatiratanga over our marine estate. Not the end, we still need that vigilance and action. What are the points that say it's under threat? I look at the northern border, I look at the 28N rights, I look at the allocation hierarchy, for example, Snapper 8, where the Crown increased the quota and it was allocated that put recreational first, not customary, not Māori commercial, not commercial. Populism of the Auckland recreational sector trumped science and settlement rights. Current debate around the Kerēme, Rangitahuia. The development of a so-called sanctuary denies the development right I spoke of earlier. It does a wonderful job of virtue signalling, and it does it at our cost. Almost continual Crown attempts to either dilute the rights transferred via the settlement or about the extent of those rights, adding ever more input controls in a system based primarily on output controls. The QMS was a remarkably pure management system whose clarity has been impeded by a succession of amendments and regulations, but which must endure as Māori have made it an absolute proxy for their rights. In many ways, the battle continues with a different set of opponents, ideologues under a range of guises from environmentalists, recreationists or economists look to attack those rights. Until we demonstrably see any change of legislation around fisheries viewed through an ideological viewpoint which puts the settlement first, puts the rights of us as settlers, they should be resisted. Until they do, and do so demonstrably, the fruits of the settlement, in my view, are not secure. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, gentlemen, for this first part of the workshop. We're about to have a 10-minute break and come back. So for those of you that are online, We'll be back in 10 minutes. That's 11:45, so please do join us. If you have any questions, use the chat room. And during the workshop panel discussion, I'll be moderating and facilitating questions to our 3 panel members here today. So do come back in 10 minutes' time. Kia ora tātou. Kia ora tātou, hoki mai ki tō tātou nei wahanga. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us again for the panel discussion. Craig Ellison left off our conversation, as far as I heard it, on a very good point, and that is that we still have work to do. We still have a vision for Ngāi Tahu in terms of our fisheries and such matters. So, look, Craig, I'd like to turn to you as both as a past supporter and negotiator around our fisheries settlement, and both as the Chief Executive for Ngāi Tahu Holdings Corporation, and pose that question with you. In the first instance, what you see as the vision for Ngāi Tahu fisheries. Then to yourself, David, I'd like to leave the last and longest word to Tipene around his vision.
My turn now.
Around Ngāi Tahu fisheries, and whānau who are online and are in the audience, appreciate that you may have questions. It really depends on these gentlemen here how much time they give us, but let's progress. Craig.
Kia ora, Rick. It's a common myth within Ngāi Tahu Holdings that my role as a CEO is to turn holdings into a seafood company. And I think there's real merit in that. I made the comment we've never wavered on our determination to grow our ownership rangatiratanga over our marine estate. And that's because of some of the comments that both Tipene and David have made. We've paid for that in blood. And for others to come and exercise rights which is in our marine estate, we need to do something about that. And commercially we do it through a focus on excellence, a focus on customer relationships. But in a strategic sense, the thing I look for is that whatever holdings is invested in, they have to have scale, or they have to have national influence. And where we have scale, we have some influence, but we have a long way to go to get to where we need to or should want to get through there through our own aspirations and the aspirations of those in whose footsteps we stand.
Kia ora, Craig. David.
Kia ora, Rick. I agree with Craig that opportunities are there for us as a people to increase our productivity in this world. This particular resource is under stress across different species in different areas, but the Holdings Corporation to date have followed a particular mantra where when an opportunity arises, we take that opportunity with both hands. And I guess the example of taking a large shareholding in Sanford's is the largest shareholding. Thank you, Tipene, Your Eminence. In Sanford's is a step further down the track. It's hard to believe that us three sitting here could ever believe that that was a dream of ours. It was never even a thought in our minuscule minds 20 years ago. But here we are at a stage now where we've done this ourselves and we haven't taken the other iwi with us. And today we haven't even discussed issues from the Tom Tawihi case through the claims hearings before the Waitangi Tribunal, the tribunal reports, having to sit and negotiate with northerners that didn't know an orange roughy from a Oreodori. And all that stuff we haven't talked about. We haven't discussed with you. And that I look forward to being able to do that and we, the three of us do, at a time later, to be arranged later in the year. Tā Tipene.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I'd just like to support what Craig said, and I'll do this very briefly, but the point is that the quota management system, the ITQ model, has been a world-setting success. Now, but despite the fact that all of our major species are in better shape than they were in 1986, it's still got fundamental problems in it. And I think we've got to get our head around that. I'll just give you the simple example of pioki or rig, the sand shark, gummy shark, pipi, and paddle crabs. If you overfish the rig, the paddle crabs go mad and knock out all the pipi. Because the rig is in there in the shallows, pioki, feasting on the paddle crabs. So you've got to think of the three species as one. Now, in a number of areas, we deal with we deal with these interactions between species quite stupidly, really, because we treat them all as individual, separate entities. And the relationship between hapuka and hoki, juvenile hoki, gives rise to all the old tikaka about that, why hapuka is a winter fish. Why? Because it's feasting on juvenile hoki. And, you know, these sort of things, these interactions between species need to be sophisticated. So while it's a beautifully shaped chisel, in my view, it's not sharp enough. And it's a model which waits rational improvement. But in terms of a vision, the system itself has been a remarkable success. And my vision for it is, and for us in this sector, that we will continue to build on the recovery of the position we were knocked out of by the allocation rules, which ended up with Ngāpuhi in the far north having more deep water quota than either Kahungunu or Ngāi Tahu, the two ones with the biggest mana moana. And that is a nonsense. They don't know what a hoki looks like up there, but they're able to lease it off. And Richard Prebble can roll over and toss with justification in his political grave in which he now lives. But his anxieties about Maori just getting quota and leasing it off to Koreans, his dreaded bogeyman was a man he called Mr. Lee. That's another story for another point in the piece. But my argument is that we should be following the maxim of hareata whakatau in relation to land. We don't sell Maori land, we buy it. And as we build ourselves back into the sector, Craig now sits on the board of Sanford, representing Ngāi Tahu's interest, which is 1 decimal point behind the level as the biggest single shareholder in Sanford. We've now got to start reorganising our thinking about where we're going to place our deep water quota for lease, what we're going to do with it, and how we're going to build it. But we've got the biggest single iwi footprint in fisheries ownership already by that simple action. keep on building it back, keep on caring for the taoka, and build our young back into fisheries. And that is a need for a coordinated move beyond holdings to our other programs and bringing our people back into communion with their resources in ways in which they can actually command some rakaterataka over them. We're on the way back with it. Good on us.
Good on us.
Tipene, there are two matters that dropped out of the conversation I want to have a discussion with the panel. The first one is based on a discussion we've had over recent weeks around the Ngāi Tahu takiwā being our land mass is actually the smaller component of the total scale and size of our takiwā being the exclusive economic zone. So a thought from you on that. And the second matter I wish to raise with the panel is our fisher people leaving the industry and how we start to grow our young fishers back into this sector, noting some previous conversations I had with Tahu Pōtiki around the state of the Moeraki fisheries, the fishing fleet, the Otago fishing fleet, the Ngāi Tahu Amara, as I like to call it, around the fleet. It is not what it used to be. How do we get back to those halcyon days, or can we get back to those halcyon days? Tipene, I'd like to refer to the first part of my question around our Ngāi Tahu takiwā and your thoughts on that in relation to our ocean and fisheries.
Well, we did achieve in the Ngāi Tahu settlement of 1998, we did achieve a thing. There's a map there which describes the zone of Ngāi Tahu, the Ngāi Tahu zone of maritime interest. And it's part of the Act, right? And it's spelled out there. We're the only iwi that has one of them. And it's a part of the Settlement Act. So we can bring the treaty to bear on the Crown for anything that is intruding into our zone. And the Ngāi Tahu zone of maritime interest covers all of the extended economic zone, the EEZ, out to 200 miles, all around our coast. It gets a bit tangled as you come into Raukaua Moana and the qualities of the Cook Strait Trench, but that's another subject for another debate on takiwā.
I see Ngāti Mutunga over there. Does it entangle itself with the Chatham Islands?
We
Because I've got a lot of cray over there.
We have a good relationship with Ngāti Mutunga of the Chatham Islands, and it's not entirely managed by Joseph. I have a first cousin out there who's imitating Wilkins's whiskers were wide and long. One day, poor fellow, they caught in a propeller and Wilkins was whiskered away, but that's my cousin who lives out there now. There's a certain amount of difficulties, but they're all manageable. What's important, most important single thing is the Chathams has species which are not being adequately handled or exploited at the moment, and so have we available to us. And the secret we should be both following is acquiring all of the stripy trumpeter quota we can assemble and taking it to market, not because it has a high value, it currently doesn't have a high value in the market, but we should be buying it while it's low valued and building it in the market with our own skills and competency. And I hold Joseph Thomas completely responsible for that task.
And Craig Ellison.
Oh, Craig Ellison, he's the one who talks about scale. Well, the way you acquire scale is you get lots of little bits and assemble them, and when you've got scale, you drive your marketing, and when you've got a really brilliant eating kai, you're the one who brings that to the front. We talked about the ancient order of the blue ruffy. That was just a silly line of Doug Graham's to a journalist. And, Mr. Graham, Minister, why do you, what's a new quota species? Well, we might discover them, he said. In 1970, we didn't know what an orange ruffy was. Well, certainly from Auckland he didn't. And furthermore, he was unlikely to know what an orange ruffy was at any time. But we weren't. The reason the Weissamunde and the Germans were here hunting for it was because they wanted the subcutaneous fat layer in it. They weren't interested in the fish as an eating fish. They wanted the subcutaneous fat for the, I think it was some branch of the lotions or perfume sector, but they wanted it essentially for a purpose other than fish eating, to eat. But then again, you've got Oreodori, and we were talking about Tūhaitara before, David, the grounds. Oreodori and orange ruffy appear in the same, come up in the same trawl. So if on the present model, you've got to have Oreodori quota if you want ruffy. And you get the same thing with hake and hawkey at certain times of the year. Now, I'll tell you a nice story about that. There's a dear friend of ours, now deceased, called Kerēme of Ngāti Porou, famous car family. And she went down to the fish and chip shop and the fish shop in Cuba Street in Wellington, and she bustles in there and says, I'd like some hawkey. I'm sorry, we're right out. Well, could I have some of that hake over there? And he wondered what she was talking about, because hake is a skin disease, and she thought hake was hake. And so I rang her up, and the old Greek fisherman told me about this with a bit of a chuckle, and I rang her up. I said, kia ora, nati kai hake. She didn't let me off the hook for that for quite a long time. But the species need to be thought about. We should be building the ownership of the low-valued ones and turning them into high-valued ones. But Doug Graham was challenged by a journalist. He said, what do you mean by new quota species? He said, and he told them about the orange ruffy. He'd only just learned about it. And he said, one day we may discover a new species, and it's absolutely reasonable. What do you mean by a new species? Well, it could be a blue ruffy. And as a result, we've got, David and I and Craig have all got a little badge because we belong to the ancient order of the blue ruffy. And that's the origin of it. And that's when you see us with our wearing our little blue ruffy badges, that's when we're on matters, missions piscatorial.
I'd like to refer to the second part of my question, and it talks about the future and can we, I remember the fishing fleet and the stories my mum used to tell about going to Piotahi and the fleet used to be parked off there where the current red and blue boats park up, and now the fleet has been moved around around from Otago up to Awarua and into the Sounds. you think about those things, and there's a lot of family successions going on in that. But it's no longer, my observation, it's no longer what it used to be. Do you think we can and should get back to those days? And where do you see our young becoming fishermen? David, you're a fisherman, you own Quota, so you'd have a good idea of that.
Well, quite frankly, Rick, the Bluff fishing fleet is in good heart. And that Bluff fishing fleet, as Joseph and Thomas will tell you, is made up essentially of families who have a whakapapa connection to most of our hapu up and down the coast. Techniques have changed, vessel designs have changed, so we're not going to have the big floating armada of vessels sitting in Pilpiltahi or in Dusky Sound anymore. They're big modern Australian-driven vessels, just as we do have in Moeraki. And the guys are much more effective and efficient in the way they're catching their quota. As far as succession goes, many of those families are passing on that knowledge and experience and competence to the younger generation. And I could name half a dozen of our families down in Bluff who have transferred the responsibility of catching their quota to their younger, the next generation. So it's Riverton's the same. At Aparima, the fishing fleet there is essentially made up of a number of Kaitahu families. If they're not directly Kaitahu families, they're married to them. So the old dictum of ensuring you have the tautoko from the mana whenua still exists today.
Well, in Indians, you've got to bring a cow.
Yep.
In our case, you bring Quota.
You bring Quota, that's right. And Quota is the quota of choice. At Moeraki, all the fishing fleet there, except one, is made up of our Kaitahu fishers. And when they're not fishing, they're running charter vessels. And all the charter vessels out of Moeraki, for example, are run by our own families. And it's not too different at Otago. Hey, Craig.
It's also a challenge, conceptual challenge, Rick, in terms of developing our the succession policy, and we look at the glamour of fishing, but the sector's broader than that, and it's how we can entice tahus into, we've got Thomas science, we've got marine science, we've got ecosystem-based fisheries management models that we have to understand. Yeah. We've got marketing, we've got how does Joseph get 2% shaved off his costs and processing. All those, it's an incredibly complex business. It starts with quota, quota's king or quota's queen, and it's expensive, but that's only a part of it. We have to have excellence across all that chain, and a big shout out to our team through COVID. They worked essentially under level 4 for almost a couple of years, and did us really proud. And how we can maintain that and grow that is a challenge. And it's not an easy challenge just because of what Tipene said and David said. If we're paying $1.7 million for a tonne of quota, Sam and his economists will get there and say, well, we've got to have this return, we've got to do this, and we've got to do that. And those numbers get pretty tough. The other thing is we operate now, I think, in a relatively unfriendly environment in terms of the government and our critics. And the primary sector, not just fishing, but the primary sector's, it's not that sexy. Go away and do A, B or C. Yet for us, it's our heartblood of what we do. It's a huge component of Ngāi Tahu's holdings portfolio, which we manage on behalf of the tribe. And like Tipene said, the quota is something we won't sell. So, we have to have that pipeline in for development, for growth, for utilisation, and to do it sharper and smarter all the way through. And that's what we want to do. It's our task to try and find a way to do that.
And it's very important to remember that when you take a boat to sea and you've got young people or people employed on it, you're going out into a challenging and frequently dangerous environment. And there's no person that I can think of in our society who carries a broader range of almost impossible responsibility than the skipper of a $40 million trawler or a $50 million trawler or bigger. Because you've got factory processing crew on board, you've got deck crew, you've got, quite often you've got someone from the ministry watching you with an evil eye as well. You're feeding and looking after him or her. And you've got male and female crews. And if you're a skipper of a major vessel, you've got enormous responsibility. You go to sea for 6 weeks in the Southern Ocean. Hey, my poa used to say, below 40 degrees there is no law. Below 50 degrees there is no God. And you go down there working for 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. For that 6 weeks you're on, you have a range of skill, comparative, comparable, and responsibility comparable to someone flying a major international jet plane full of passengers. Yet, by law and everything else, you are God in charge of that ship and totally responsible for what happens on it. Now, the range of skill required is massive, but a jet plane pilot would be regarded as much more illustrious than saying, I'm a fishing skipper. And one of the hardest jobs I had when I took over the chairmanship of Sea Lord was to convince a bunch of accountants largely, and I'm not negating them, but accountancy is a function rather than a profession. Those guys sitting at that table didn't realise their total dependence of the assets they were in charge of, their total dependence on those fishing captains. And you become a fishing captain by training, experience, development over time. And I introduced something to bring the senior fishing skipper to report to the board at least twice a year. And he had to turn up and get across. The directors of the companies hardly had a clue about it. It's a wonderfully demanding and honourable occupation, and it should be honoured. And the same thing goes for the guy with the small boat, working his patch inshore, landing good quality kai and delivering it to people. The range of skills they require are remarkable. And the fact that there's young people who aspire to that, we should be responding to as an iwi and working out ways and means by which they can be trained, putting some of them into the Westport Deep Sea Fishing School, doing all the things we can to enlarge them. We've only got one scholarship in that area. That's the Mazetta Scholarship from money given to us for that purpose by an ally and friend in Chicago. And, we've done bugger all about it. And I think it's time that we really started to think about redeveloping a maritime culture to go with our investment.
I think it's well worth noting too that when we took the claim to the Waitangi Tribunal, we counted up our skippers, our deep sea skippers. There were very few of them, but the majority of them were Quota. And those guys, well, no girls at that time, but those guys are now due for retirement. So we're running very short of succession in that area. There's still a few around, but many of those first mates, bosuns, second mates, first officers and skippers came from our tribe. There were very few from the north, if any at all. There might have been one or two perhaps, and they had a whakapapa down south here as well. So that was something to be acknowledged, and we did during the claim process. The fact that we had the competence at sea at the time to push our claims out to the 200-mile limit with some justification, eh, Tipene?
Gentlemen, I just want to provide the opportunity for Charmaine and our audience to take any questions, if we do have any questions from the audience. So far I haven't received, as far as I can tell, any questions online. So happy to take any questions from the audience. Kia ora. Makarini.
Mihi kia koutou. Mihi kia koe, tā tip, for your latest orders. And thanks guys for your presentation today on fisheries settlement. My question is around climate change and water temperature rise. How's that going to look for the future for our assets, and what do you have in mind to combat what that would look like? Kia ora.
It's a great question, and it's not an easy one to answer with a, hey, we're going to do this. I think there's, and it's not just the rise in sea temperatures, it's the acidity, it's the impact on shell formation in kōrero, and so there's a whole range of impacts. There are impacts that have happened in the past, but it's probably the issue now is how quickly they're accumulating and how we can deal with them. Some of it we're protected to a degree by our southerly status and the fact that our waters are cooler, and the example of New Zealand salmon is an indication, New Zealand king salmon is an example of when you disregard the extremes of water temperature. Some of it will be with the cycle of more extreme weather events, and that's an issue of how we build and where we place our ports, and what sort of strength and design we put into new vessels as they enter into the fishery, just to make sure that they are robust as conditions potentially worsen. But it is a challenge in a management sense. As northern fish stocks come south, there's not a lot of snapper quota in Bluff. And what was caught used to be used as bait. So we have to have a voice about the management of that, because it can't just be left to Wellington to put pins and numbers on a map. We have to be there because our fishermen are that is the epitome of citizen science, and they're out there every day, and we have to listen to them and say, well, how can we answer that? So it's not a fudge answer, it's an answer that really indicates that we've got an awful lot of work ahead of us, how we might address, adapt those issues, or adapt to those issues. And adaptability was one of the themes I talked about. We have to be good at that, and we have to observe where people are responding smartly in those areas.
And the question has also got some substance in terms of there's not a lot of snapper and bluff, as Craig says, but by the same token, they're now quite commonly, but not on the same scale as snapper, but they're catching a blue cod in the Hauraki Gulf. And there's fish that we've always associated with our coastlines of measurement are now appearing somewhere else, just as rapoka, the sea leopard, is now starting to appear on the mainland coast where no one has dealt with it in living memory. And there's all sorts of movements of species as a consequence of the sea changes that are taking place in the sea. And salinity is also quite an interesting factor in that. So it's a complex question which needs to be put into the mix about future management. But until you recognise that it exists, then as a question, nothing much gets done about it. We've known for years, and we developed the technology, for instance, for changing, genetically modifying grass so that cattle did not produce methane. Australia and Canada are using New Zealand technology for that, but we've still got a rahui out on any genetic modification. And we'll tend to get like that with our systems. I don't want Ngāi Tahu to be like New Zealand Incorporated or the Palestinians, never miss an opportunity for missing an opportunity. You've got to think about it and start devising your responses. And I don't think we're doing that actively enough, although to be fair, Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu is beginning to get its organisational head around participating in those discussions, but they haven't got much out beyond our own environmental teams.
Makareni, your question is, it's quite a difficult one, as Craig has explained, to answer. And I guess the question relating to global warming and the sea temperature increases over a period is really important, but there's another issue that is surfacing, probably from north, from Auckland, where people are getting concerned about the techniques used on deep sea trawlers, whether it be bottom trawling or midwater trawling. It was really interesting. They posted a banner on one of our trawlers, I think it was the Sanford's vessel, wasn't it, up in Auckland, tied to the wharf. It said no more bottom trawling. That was a Hoki fishing boat. It actually midwater trawls. The nets never touch the bottom. So the guy, they got it all wrong, and they didn't understand the issues relating to the technology that we're using on those super trawlers today is quite different to what we were used to when we had the Otago Gilead and the Otago Buccaneer cruising up and down our coasts. So that's another issue, Makareni, that we have to be concerned about, because there's a lobby group that are determined to stop those techniques continuing. And it will affect us directly because of our Sanford's connection.
Thank you. I have time for one more short question and one short response-ish.
Oh, so we'll be asking.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Carl? Hui anō. If there are no more questions, look, first of all, I'd like to thank our audience here today, as well as our audience online. Thank you very much for coming along and supporting this fisheries lecture series. We do have a number of other lecture series as well, or lectures coming up until November this year. Our next lecture, I'm sure you will all be interested in it here at the panel, is the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Overview and its contents and the negotiations that occurred. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. So please do come along and online or participate as you can. Gentlemen, look, thank you for joining the panel and providing your insight and background knowledge to our fisheries settlement, of which I learnt a new thing. There was 2 fisheries settlements, and actually 3. I'm learning.
Father,
I'm
Son,
still
and
learning.
Holy Ghost.
The aquaculture.
Oh yes, sorry. There is the aquaculture settlement as well, and probably that's a discussion in its own right for we can have over possibly the weekend wānanga that Tipene has requested. So again, thank you for everyone for joining. Unless there's any final words here from our panel. Okay.
Are you providing lunch?
We can provide anything you want. How's that? Okay. Hui anō, māku e whakakapi tō tātou nau hui, mi noi tātou. E te matua te tamata wairua tapu me ngā reira pono, me te māngai. Tēnei rā mātou tō pōnanga iti tino i atu kia koutou. Tuko mai te hātora anō ki runga ki a mātou i tēnei wā. Te whaitia manaki tia o mātou mahi me o mātou whakaaro. Me te ino hoki kia whakatuwheratia ngā huarahi i mua i a mātou, ki o mātou kainga, ki o mātou whare, i roti o ko te kōreriatanga, ka tuku nātu inoi i runga i te ingoa kaha, te ingoa pono, me te ingoa rangimāri, ko te mānga hei te tuko mai. Ai ne, āgene, āmene. Kia ora tātou.